Welcome back, everyone. Hi, I'm Sandy Rosenthal, host of Beat the Big Guys. And this week, my guest is from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and her name is Dr. Ketra Davenport-King, or Dr. Ketra. Hello there.
Hi, how are you?
I'm wonderful. We're actually getting a respite today from the heat. It's only in the upper 80s today.
Oh, wow. Now that's great because we're always close to 100.
It,
Here
really, seriously, always
yes,
close to 100?
yes.
Oh my gosh, we had 100-degree temperatures last week. I had to play a sports game in the
Mhm.
tennis. It was a league game, so I couldn't say sorry. I don't want to play in the heat, and
Right.
I was affected for 4 or 5 days
Oh, wow.
by it.
Yes. Yes, we've been like 105, 106, 107. And it's interesting because I met a man the other day and he was like, oh, well, how are you enjoying this cool hot day? Because it was 98 degrees.
So
So he said cool hot day.
we we can relate. We can
Mhm.
relate, the folks in New
Yeah,
Orleans, and I'm
yeah.
so glad that this heat wave is seems to be over in New Orleans. But you say it's just going to continue in your area?
Yeah,
Oh
that's
my gosh.
Texas for you. We're always in that area. It's unpredictable. Those who are born here, we just get used to it. Those who come here, they're trying to figure it out. And those who leave here and say, ooh, I'm glad I'm gone. But yes.
Well, my mistake is I played a league tennis match that started at 11 in the morning and didn't
Mhm.
finish until quarter to 2.
Oh, wow.
That's crazy. I shouldn't have done it. I'll be
Yes,
honest. I shouldn't have done it.
that's
I
the
don't
heat of the
know
day.
who I thought I was, and I've learned my lesson.
Yes, that's the heat of the day. But New Orleans is great. I love New Orleans, but I'm sure it's the kind of moist heat
It
because
is.
of the
Oh,
water. Yeah.
that dry hot is over. We're back to the moist heat where you walk
Yeah.
out the door in the spring into a feel like you've just stepped into a bath. It's
Oh,
back.
wow.
It's
Yeah.
back.
No,
Yeah,
we
but it's
have dry
better.
heat. It burns your skin when you walk outside.
No, it's just you're just a soaking wet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, and
wow.
which is a little annoying, but it's better and it's healthier. It's better. It's no, we're all grateful for it. We all love our hot, humid 88
Okay.
as opposed to dry 98.
Yes. And see, let me tell you, we'll take 98 any day. Okay. Because this 105, this
You can have
107.
it. Well,
Yes.
some of our listeners may not be familiar with who you are, so I'm going to take just a minute and introduce you, and then I just can't wait to hear your story today.
Okay, great.
Dr. Ketra Davenport-King is charismatic, energetic, and captivating. Those are the words that describe Dr. Ketra, and that's how she signs her name.
Mhm.
Armed with over 20 years of serving the community, Dr. Ketra is an advocate, speaker, mentor, life coach, and philanthropist who has radically impacted the lives of believers under the flagship of her ministry. She opened the Doors to Life Advocacy Group, Inc. in 2004 to serve as an advocate for victims and survivors of childhood sexual abuse and to be the voice of hope for those still in silence. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit overcome because I do understand that so many are in silence
Mhm.
because of what's happened to them. So I'm so grateful for your work, and I think our listeners now have been a little bit a little prepared now for what is to come. But this is very important for us all to hear. Thank you, Dr. Ketra. I'm turning the mic over to you.
Thank you, Sandy, so much. First, let me just say I appreciate the opportunity to come on and spend this time with you today. I don't count any opportunity as just an opportunity. It's an opportunity for me to share my story and hopefully to impact someone else's life to share their story. But as you have already mentioned who I am, thank you again so much. My sole purpose is, and my mantra is that the struggle has no hold on the outcome. That is my mantra. That has been my wind that has pushed me to where I am today. Being a victim of childhood sexual abuse and an overcomer of childhood sexual abuse, and now a survivor, it is my greatest impact in this community, and as well as others, to help other individuals to overcome. By doing so, I I want to just take a moment and share my story. My story is just what it is. I was a victim, my dad, by my biological father, who is, he abused me from the age 6 to 12. And as a young girl, and it's interesting because when I share, every time I share the story, it's always a different moment for me. And but when I think about how personally, as a victim, we grow up in a dysfunction, thinking that it is a function. So for me, as a childhood victim of sexual abuse, I thought for a very long time that that was a functional situation in my home. So I spent early part of my childhood years being at the hands of my abuser, being there, just being privy to the effects of what it is to be, abused. And I don't want to get into that. And I think that's why I don't want to talk about that. I'm open to questions, but I definitely want to just say we'll leave it as a childhood victim of childhood sexual abuse. So what I've done is I've spent the last 20 years before that overcoming being that victim, becoming a survivor. So through my healing process, I was able to move forward and open up the doors to Life After Advocacy Group in 2004. And Life After Advocacy Group is an organization that target individuals and help them to overcome being in that dark place and overcome having a voice that is not heard and overcome being able to speak truth to their situation. So my life was impacted in many ways. As a child growing up, I was very quiet. I was very, very withdrawn, which is also one of the signs. And I didn't really have a full circle of friends is what you would say. And then as I went matriculated through my high school years, I just became very reclusive. For me, the moment that I stopped, I was a conduit to stopping the abuse, because at the age of 12, I told my mother I didn't want to go back to visit my dad at that time. He lived in Houston, and I know I'm kind of snagging this story, but at the time he lived in Houston because they had divorced when I was 9 years old, and the abuse for my dad intensified between the ages of 9 and 10 because I was visiting him in Houston. I write about that chrono piece of my life in my book, Seeing Beyond the Shattered Glass, but also I stopped the abuse myself, but I had to start dealing with that dark tunnel that I was in, because now I had stopped creating myself, prevented a space for myself to stop going into the abuse. However, I was still affected by the abuse, but I didn't know how to deal with that because at that time, I didn't share that with my mom, or I didn't share that with anyone to that avail. And so I had to kind of go through my life trying to figure that out, which took me to the age of 18. That is when I really started to rebel. I feel like some people rebel in high school, whereas I didn't rebel until after I graduated from high school, because I spent, as I stated, most of my high school years very quiet, very withdrawn, very in just to myself. But when I got out of high school, I kind of went through this rebellious stage, and that began to just lash out, being in a lot of unhealthy relationships, going through the whole trajectory of not understanding what it is to have function. And that's what I mentioned, being in a dysfunction, not understanding what function looks like in a relationship. And so I went through that part in my early 20s. And then probably when I turned about 30, that was very traumatic, that 20 to 30 year, that 10-year gap for me. I did get married in the latter end of the 20s, and that resulted in a divorce. However, when I got about 30s, when I really started seeking out to saying, what is it and why was I chose? Why me? Why was I the one who had to be abused? And then I began to realize in my research that I wasn't the only one. It wasn't the why me for me. It wasn't the only individual who was impacted by childhood sexual abuse. But oftentimes, as being victims, you don't realize that you're not alone because you feel alone. And the impact is greater to you because you're the one who's experiencing it. And so as I begin to matriculate through that part of my life, in about 30 years old, I actually returned to school. I always tell people I'm a late bloomer. And I use that as a story because I want to encourage people, because of all the impact that I had in my life, that at 30, I went back to school is when I decided to go back. So from the age 30 to 40, I became Dr. King. I didn't have the traditional platform just because I was so broken. I had so many hurts and so many pains, and I couldn't put that puzzle together. So I did go back to school, and at that time I had my children. I have a son and a daughter, and then from that point, in 33 is when I opened the doors to Life After Advocacy Group. I did seek counseling. I went through counseling. I went through therapy. I went through years of that actually to help me get to the place where I could be able to recover and be able to walk in a wholeness place where I can help other victims who have been impacted. One of the questions that I always been asked, and I will say this is, do I have a roadmap to my recovery? And my recovery was, for me, and this is what I teach and what I believe, it was 3 stages. You got to identify, you have to admit, and you have to accept what has happened to you individually so that you can be an overcomer of those things that has impacted you. And I feel like when we identify the hurt, identify the pain, identify that it's not your fault that it happened, identify that I didn't do anything, that I was innocent. How can a 6-year-old child do anything? How can a 9-year-old child do anything? And then once you identify that, then you can begin to admit that it happened. Because when you admit it, you becomes therapeutic. You go, and in that admitting stage, you admit these things happen. It was this person who did it for me. And you deal with a lot in that admitting stage. Also the forgiveness the forgiveness part, I apologize, the forgiveness part, because that is very essential that's very essential to our healing in order for us to become overcomers. And so for me, I stayed in that admitting stage for about, 10 years because I had to really come to that place that I have to admit, because that, again, my abuser was my biological father. So, there's a lot of things that have to come out of that. That's my mother's husband. That's my father. He was a staple in the community, which oftentimes we take that as a mark to say, oh, well, he couldn't have done it because he is this person. He's this upholding. He's a soccer dad, and he does this, and he's had a lot of friends. But that's most of the characteristics. I'm not saying those are the characteristics. I'm saying that is most of the characteristics of individual who are abusers. And it's very prevalent in our news today. But I just, that's a little bit about me, and in regards to how I became Dr. Ketra. And then about 33 is when I opened up the doors to Life After Advocacy Group. And again, I've been advocating for about 20 years. I do a lot of community outreach, a lot of walks. Now the target is being in platforms, being in conferences, being in spaces where I can share my story, being in spaces where we can bring awareness and prevention and have a voice to speak out, because the voice can easily get overshadowed by things and people who still today in 2022 want to just make this a shallow conversation. And that's why I like the segment is Beat the Big Guys, because these are big guys in a lot of women's lives, a lot of men lives as well. But it affects us everywhere. It affects us in our churches, in our communities, in our homes. And that was my second book that I released in the latter part of 21, called Revelation, because I talk about how sexual abuse affects the church. We see it in the news, but we still look at it as a blind eye, and how as victims who sit in the pews Sunday after Sunday who are affected and hurt, and how it's just decades of pain that mount on top of each other. And so that is how I got to be Dr. Ketra in a snapshot. I love what I do, and I've been advocating, and I hope that I can always be that advocate and that voice to help someone else speak out.
Dr. Ketra, I was overcome just telling everybody, introducing you, and I'm even more overcome now, but I got to keep myself together here since I'm host of this episode. I'm so proud to know you. I'm so proud to know you. And I feel that I've gained strength to just listening to you today, just in these few minutes. I'm grateful for this opportunity to listen. And I have so many questions. I almost don't know where to begin, but I'm hoping that I'm voicing the question on our listeners' minds right now is, did you press charges against your father?
That is a great question, Sandy, because interesting as it may be, I did not. When I spoke out, I was 23 years old. Let me back up. When I spoke out, first time, I was 23. I told my mother. I chronicled that story in my book. Then at 33, I began to really just share my story publicly. Like I began to speak out. So charges from me never came. But however, as we know, abuser is going to abuse again. They will do it again. So we don't sometimes, I know we may not see the fruit of the, I guess the award to the person, I guess the hurt, the pain that we want to be, resolved in us. But what happened was my dad abused my stepmother, then niece. And so out of that abuse came the charges.
I see. So thank you. I had to do that. I had to voice what I'm sure was in a lot of people's minds. And you discussed this in much more detail in your second book.
My first book, which is a fictional memoir, Seeing Beyond the Shattered Glass. Seeing Beyond the Shattered Glass.
Thank you. So you said something right from the beginning, which I listened to, because you actually you could have been talking about me. You said you were a shy little girl. You were quiet. Mm-hmm. Is it all right would it be appropriate to use the word predator? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. So is that a quality that a predator looks for in the victims, the quiet ones, the more inward ones?
I believe that I could say that, statistics have shown that there are some different characteristics from the grooming process, because most predators and abusers, they groom their victims. So they look for the one who is the quiet one. That means the least resistant one. And a lot of times there may be some emotional scars as they grow up. Now, we can't say a 6-year-old has an emotional scar, but we can say that a 6-year-old can be groomed by a predator that can become their victim. You can be groomed, and some predators spend years grooming young girls, grooming boys to become that victim. Go ahead.
No, you go on. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was just going to agree. I was just saying, yes, that can be very well a characteristic that is looked for from the predator who is grooming their victim.
This idea that children are being groomed is really all over the news right now. With just yesterday, Jelaine, the Maxwell, she was the one who would groom the young girls for the Jeffrey Epstein. Okay, so this is all being discussed now. I admit, here I am at my age. I recently became a senior citizen. The idea of grooming, I had never heard of it, but we need to know about it. Because once we know about it, we can perhaps see it happening and be able to step in before it's too late. Do you feel that your father may have been grooming others, and there may have been a dozen perhaps?
Yeah, grooming, interesting as that may be, I believe that every predator or abuser, they groom their victims, because you got to gain their trust. Right. You got to pull them in. They got to feel like you're their savior. You're their everything. You're the one who is going to solve their emotional problems. You're going to be the one who is going to solve their financial problems. You're going to be almost like an icon, a hero to them. Because a lot of times when you are broken, or when you are in a situation and someone can solve your problem, especially as young girls, right? I mean, young girls, you feel like, oh, if he can buy me whatever I want, or if he can help me get my hair done, or he can solve my problems emotionally, then, oh, well, surely I can trust him. So whatever it is that I can repay him or I can give back, then it becomes just a normalcy. And I use those words, the dysfunction, the function of normalcy, is because that's what it becomes. It's a normalcy. Well, it's okay because he's going to do these things. And a predator and a abuser, they capitalize off of those emotions. They take advantage of that. I think about, as you were just saying, I want to say her name is Grislin. I can't never pronounce her name correctly.
I think it's pronounced Jillian.
Jillian, yes.
Jillian.
She was the one. She was the front person.
Mm-hmm.
Befriend. You have a need. You know, a lot of these young girls, unfortunately, may have an emotional scar, and that emotional scar can be very, very deep based on where they are with that emotional scar. They may need a place to live. They may be out on the street. They may not, or they can have everything. They can have a great family. However, they're missing something emotionally. How do you band-aid? How do you start to feel that scar? And if we can feel that scar, then I can lure you in. Because once you're in, you're in. That becomes just part of, again, that word, that normalcy.
And we also need to understand, continue.
No, you're fine. I'm glad.
It's important for us to, as much as it hurts to hear this, I mean, I'm having difficulty keeping the tears come, but I feel like I need to hear this, and our listeners need to hear this, and they need to understand it. You mentioned that in addition to, looking for the quieter child, and that's what you were. You were a baby in my mind. A 6-year-old is a baby. I have a 6-year-old granddaughter.
Yes.
Okay. So, but you also mentioned that your father was an upstanding member of the community. Mm-hmm. So talk about that. That's another thing that you, even a young child can see when their parent or guardian is an upstanding and respected member of the community. Talk about conflicting emotions going on here. Mm-hmm. And it's probably all intentional.
Yes.
Nothing's accidental.
Right. I use one word, adoration, because when you have people who are in positions and in roles, they are adored by their followers, right? So people see these individuals as upstanding citizens. I think about yesterday, R. Kelly, the singer who was sentenced to 30 years for human trafficking, sexual abuse of young girls.
That was just this week. This week.
Yesterday. Yes, just yesterday. Yes.
Yesterday.
So with that being said, there was a sense of adoration. They admired his role, his position. Mm-hmm. So I had to back into that to say the reason why we sometimes have a misconception when it comes to abusers or a predator and what they look like, because it couldn't be someone who is in this type of role. It couldn't be the pastor. It couldn't be the councilman. It couldn't be the father who is a soccer dad who has a great job, who lives in a great community and had ideally the great kids. It couldn't be him. It couldn't be him, right? Because it has to be someone who is impoverished. Okay, because we're just talking about the mindset and the visual that we see a predator. And that's why we have to shift how we see people. We got to shift how we think about people. You can't adore positions and ignore the people. You got to say, well, anybody is possible to. I think about it. I always tell my husband I don't get in these kind of conversations, but the conversation is just like with the Catholic Church, because I don't have, I don't like to open up doors that. But since it's in the news, it's free game, right? That's in the news. So that's something you can research. I don't feel like that's me talking about that. But it's
a fact. You're discussing facts.
That's a fact.
You're not editorializing.
Right.
You're discussing facts. It's okay. It's definitely. You don't need my permission, but cosmically, it's okay to just lay out facts.
Right. And I think about all of these priests and these young boys who have generationally been sexually abused. Well, that's because we reverence and adore the position.
And it's not possible. It's not.
I just wanted to process that. We adore the position.
Mm-hmm. I'm raised Catholic, so I do understand that.
Right. And again, that's why, because I always try to be very sensitive to that, because we cannot believe that would happen. So what do we do, Sandy? We send our children. We release our children because of our trust and adoration for the role. And that's across the board. I'm not saying that religion is the only religion. I'm saying that this is how young kids fall into the hands and traps of abusers, of a predator. R. Kelly, the parents trusted him.
Excuse me. And I was just going to add, but we, the adults, need to be paying attention. We the adults need to step in. We the adults need to open our eyes to something that could very likely be going under our very noses.
And protect our children. And don't adore and trust the position. You understand? We cannot trust the position. Okay, if he's a priest, we can all respect that, right? We can respect that. But I'm not going to leave my children. I don't know you like that. And even if I did, I need to be present because these are my children. And they are young. We're talking about young boys, young girls. And then you grow up. Yes, you grow up and you have to deal with the life after, which is that's the name of my organization, Life After Advocacy Group, because now you got to deal with the life after being a victim of abuse. Now you got to deal with that stigma. You got to overcome the scars, the internal scars that it has impacted your life. We often wonder why some of our children are so angry. Why do they act out? Why they're so, they like this here, but then they're like that. It's because the emotional internal scars that they deal with. Now, I'm not saying that every kid is abused. I'm not saying that by no means. And we pray that. There's because the statistics says it, 1 in 6 boys and 1 in 4 girls. So we know every kid is not affected by sexual abuse. But the numbers are great and it's still very relevant. It's still happening today. And we have to be, intentional, and we have to be woke. And we got to know that we got grandchildren. I was listening to you talk about your granddaughter. I'm getting ready to have my first grandchild ever. I turned 50 and everything changed in my life. The grandchild, the daughter-in-law, everything. I got it all. And so, but I have to forever be intentional and be aware and be watchful and have conversations. I came up right after that era where our parents, and you probably was in that era because you just say, you just didn't talk about certain things.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely from that era.
Yeah, so you're in that era. I came I was the kid of that era. That means, so I came up right in after that. And so I still had that impact that you don't talk about it. And so because of that, we didn't talk about those things in the home. But we are in a whole nother world right now. And I think that parenting needs to include conversations. We got to have conversations. Just like you talk to your kids about what kind of food you want or what kind of drink or soda, but I'm not saying it has to be but it needs to be some conversations. There's great books about it. Just talk about, so your kids can identify if someone touched them, they know that they can trust their mom or their dad, their grandparents, their trusted one. They can trust somebody to tell somebody.
Good. That's excellent advice. And speaking of book, can you tell our listeners a little bit more about your most recent book that came out?
Revelation, with the undercurrent lay in the middle of my work. I had fun writing that book, Sandy. You know why? Because I was able to be creative. That's it's a novel, right? So it's fictional, but I have been an advocate for so long, and I've been able to sit across men and women and children who have shared their stories. So I have all these thoughts going in my mind all the time. So the reason why I had so much fun writing Revelation is because I was able to really attack and address some of the issues that I've had without exposure, without exposing individuals, but can bring those things to characters and situations with characters. So as a reader, if it wasn't you, it could connect to somebody you may know. And you say, when you go to church, we're in church, we all love, we have some form of religion, whatever that is, then we know that things that go on, but it's so much hurt and pain and people are affected. So I took the journey of a family who, Pastor, I always get, I got so many things in my mind, but I took a journey of the family, and he was the lead pastor. But the lead pastor had I don't want to say, do I want to tell all the story? But anyway, he had a human sex trafficking ring.
Oh, wow.
Which one of the the girls was in his church, because some of the girls were in his church. However, one of the girls ended up marrying his son, but she never told her husband what his father did to her. And so the father I'm gonna put a pin right there. So you got to read the story.
Okay, I was going to say, don't want to give away too much.
Yes, we don't want to give away too much.
No more spoiler alerts. So,
but I do. That's revelation. I was able to be creative. I will begin writing the next book from the spinoff of that in latter part of this year. A lot of my writing, Sandy, is to bring awareness and prevention to sexual abuse, and I target that. I have a very specific goal in my books. I tell the story, I tell what happened, I lead you down the road to forgiveness, and hopefully through your sense of salvation. That because you need to be free at the end of the day.
Well, thank you so much, because I'm sure there are many that would like to write a book and would like to do this and don't, but you did it. You did it. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners in their quest to beat the big guys in their life?
Well, I think to beat the big guys in your life, one, you have to be open and transparent with yourself first. Be true to you first, because a lot of times we beat ourselves up from the pain. And that's why we got the big guys are who they are, because we can't beat them. But how do we overcome them? Is being true to ourselves. We see us first. Then you don't be afraid to speak your voice. Share your story. Tell your story. It's going to help somebody. Somebody needs to hear your story. That they do. They're waiting for you. You may be sitting up saying, I'm not that important. Don't nobody care. They don't want nobody hearing me. Everybody's talking about this. What makes my story so unique? Because it's your story. Tell your story.
And I think that is what I hooked in on there is they're waiting. They're waiting for you. People want to hear your story. They're waiting for you. Thank you so much, Dr. Ketra Davenport-King. And I hope all of you enjoyed this episode. Please be sure to rate, subscribe, and like this podcast on all of your favorite platforms. And remember, no matter who you are, you too can beat the big guys.
Yes. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Here, stay with me. I'm going to stop recording.
Okay.
Don't go anywhere.